Hello, I'm the Media Wiz, because one art form wasn't enough. Let's talk about Jim Carrey, specifically his early career. Getting his start on In Living Color, the guy established himself as being stellar with physical comedy and rapid-fire quips, being able to fluctuate his facial features, his entire body, and able to do a variety of different voices and impressions. He started rising through the ranks and eventually got noticed by various studio agents and talent scouts who saw potential for him in feature film. This led to some of his first few films, which are still hailed to this day as comedy classics. 3 of these films include Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber. As for my thoughts on these movies, Dumb and Dumber is still one of my all-time favorite films. The movie that gave the Farrelly brothers their jumpstart into directing, the film follows 2 idiot best friends, Harry played by Jeff Daniels and Lloyd played by Jim Carrey, as they travel to deliver a suitcase to a woman who one of them drove to the airport. Little do they know the suitcase was meant to be left at the airport to be picked up by some gangsters who kidnapped her husband. Once they get to Aspen, Harry falls for the woman that Lloyd already fell in love with, their friendship is tested, and a bunch of other wackiness ensues. As for The Mask, it follows Carrey as Stanley Ipkiss, a doormat of a man who ends up finding a mask that has ancient Norse powers to unleash cartoony law-breaking abilities. From there, Stanley as the Mask will save the town from a power-hungry gang leader out for revenge, get the girl, and walk away with newly found confidence. Not only is the movie very funny with Jim Carrey's over-the-top delivery, but the movie is also a very well-written story with relatable characters and even outstanding effects that look just as good now as they did back in 1994. And lastly, we have Ace Ventura, a mystery comedy about an eccentric detective who has a way with animals as he's asked to help find a football team's dolphin mascot. While this movie is a comedy classic, I was actually raised seeing the sequel, When Nature Calls, first, with that movie being about Ace going to Africa to find this bat so he can bring together 2 feuding African tribes. And I don't know why, but I still really like this one. I still have a lot of nostalgia for it from when they first showed it on Cartoon Network. Man, Cartoon Network back then was great. You could show a PG-13 movie on a network that was marketed towards kids. Both Ace Ventura movies benefit with Jim Carrey's wonderful portrayal of the title character. Both of them take full advantage of Carrey's great physical presence and wacky behavior. Despite the fact that most of these movies varied in terms of their critical reception, they were 1, popular with audiences, and very successful at the box office. And so, naturally, when something gets popular, companies are going to jump at the chance to capitalize on it. And so, out of these 3 movies, we got 3 TV shows. Animated TV shows, to be exact. Turning 3, or 4, I guess, PG-13 comedies with stuff that the really youngins probably weren't allowed to see, into Saturday morning cartoons. Because hey, it was the 90s. During that time, Warner Brothers shows like Tiny Toons and Animaniacs had plenty of adult innuendos all throughout, so why not? All 3 of these shows started in 1995, shortly after the success of each of their movies. The first to be released was the Mask animated series. The series still follows Stanley Ipkiss, whose character resorts back to the good-natured doormat role. I like to think that he went back to that, possibly because Tina left, since she never really shows up in the series. But we do get some returning faces from the movie. Charlie, Stanley's fellow bank employee friend, Kellaway and Doyle, 2 bumbling cops who are trying to stop the mask, and of all characters, Peggy, who becomes kind of a potential love interest for Stanley. Anyway, Stanley always turns back into the mask character every now and again, often used in this show to defeat bad guys who are trying to take over the world. No dissimilar to the comics, where the Mask was more of a violent, bloodthirsty character who just so happened to go after and kill off even worse bad guys. Sort of a Deadpool before Deadpool. So this show clashes the overall superhero aspect of the original comics and mixes it with the more lighthearted cartoony humor from the film. Also carried over from the comics is the aspect of more people wearing the mask. Stanley obviously uses it the most, and Milo the dog wears it a couple times, as well as some of the villains. There's an episode where Peggy gets her hands on it.
You adore me. You desire me. You want to marry me.
I do?
And there's even an episode where a baby puts on the mask. And yet still a better masked baby story than Son of the Mask. The big question here is, does this show still hold up after all this time? I personally would say yes. While some of the gags are toned down, they still get a good balance of adult humor in there every now and again.
Mrs. P, man? Really? Go, honey! We don't have that kind of relationship.
Along with the Mask's trademark cartoony antics, slapstick, and voices. A lot of the praises going to the 1, nice animation, and 2, the main voice actor they got for Stanley, Rob Paulsen. Rob Paulsen does an excellent job playing both the reluctant Stanley character as well as the over-the-top Mask character. Whenever he's Stanley, we see a very human side to the character.
Oh, it's no use. It's seared into my brain. Wear the mask. Get limbo fever. and risk not finding Milo.
Whenever he plays the mask, he's able to keep a main voice molded after Jim Carrey's portrayal, but he's also able to delve into some occasionally funny voices and accents. I find it appropriate since this show came out at the same time that Rob Paulsen shined as a voice actor for shows like Animaniacs, which was actually parodied in one episode too. He really brings a lot of his own charisma to the role, just as much as Jim Carrey does. Hell, he even does a good job playing the mask when he's doing the theme song.
With my winning smile, I'm a living lesson in flair and style. You just can't help but stare at my savoir-faire. I'm Nouveau, Deco, Roman, Greco, Rococo, Baroque, Bebop, hip-hop, flip-flop. Somebody stop me!
Goes without saying, but this is a way better use of Rob Paulsen's voice acting talent than something like the failed Bubsy cartoon pilot. As for animation, it's very Saturday morning kids cartoon superhero-ish, but that's totally fine since that's the kind of look they were going for. The human characters look mostly realistic, which appropriately clashes once the mask shows up, with his more exaggerated look and wild actions contrasting with the world around him, just like the movie. The show itself was aired on CBS and lasted only 3 seasons, which I think is totally fine. It came at the right time and didn't overstay its welcome. Overall, I think the Mask animated series was both a good show in its own right and a totally serviceable and respectful adaptation of the movie. 2 months later, after the release of the Mask series, ABC started airing a Hanna-Barbera produced cartoon based on Dumb and Dumber. And it's easily the weakest of the 3 in my opinion. The show follows Harry and Lloyd as they drive across country, each episode involving either the two getting jobs and screwing them up, or just simple shenanigans. They travel in the Shaggin' Wagon, which is now given the name Otto. By the way, didn't Lloyd sell the van for the bike that gets them to Aspen? Whatever. A lot of the humor in this show feels more in line with another Hanna-Barbera series, Two Stupid Dogs, which, while not a perfect show, was easily better than this. I think that's mainly because Dumb and Dumber just isn't the kind of show that you turn into a kid's cartoon. The Mask had the benefit of being based on an anti-hero comic book, and the Ace Ventura movies were all about cracking cases. While I appreciate them trying to work in the whole road trip aspect from the movie, it still feels a bit more watered down for the show. Then again, the original movie had headlight boobs, so maybe that was for the best. I mean, imagine if they tried making a kid show out of The Cable Guy or Me, Myself, and Irene. An example of them adding something here for the younger audiences is the funny animal sidekick, Kitty, a beaver who Harry and Lloyd think is a cat. Her involvement in the episodes boils down to either her getting annoyed by the duo's idiocy or getting them out of trouble. With the premise of having 2 dolts travel around and getting into shenanigans while annoying people along the way, there's plenty of opportunity to work with. Most of the original movie had stuff like this, like the scene where they pick up the assassin thinking that he's a hitchhiker. But the show doesn't really have the same level as the original movie, though they did try to incorporate some things from the original film, like Lloyd's outlandish fantasy sequences. While there are a few gags that caught me off guard, most of the jokes just came across like they were just random and stupid for the sake of being random and stupid. And surprisingly enough, this cartoon actually doesn't delve into that much toilet humor. Surprising to me because the movie had a lot of it, and it seems like cartoons usually take that as an easy way out for an easy crap or fart joke. I think easily my least favorite episode from this whole show has to be the laundromat episode. The whole premise is as follows. Harry and Lloyd go to a laundromat thinking it's an amusement park. Meanwhile, Kitty goes to an actual amusement park, leading up to this one punchline at the end.
If that's the amusement park, then where were we?
Wow! 2 amusement parks in the same town!
Before watching this show, I read some reviews and watched some videos to try and get some perspective on it, and there's one reoccurring criticism that I myself just can't personally agree with. Some critics have said this is one of the ugliest cartoons ever made, and while I don't think the designs of the characters or locations are really anything special, I've seen way worse. The Nut Shack, Slim Shady Show, Brothers Grunt, Pope Town, Groovenians, Rugrats Preschool Days, those were way more unappealing in the way they looked compared to this. Critical as I'm being towards this show, I want to throw in 2 positives that I have about it. For one thing, I did like the 2 lead voice actors. For Harry, they got Bill Figurbacchi, famous as Patrick Star. Honestly, he did a very good job as the character with the kind of dumb lug tone he was giving off. Kind of a Patrick before Patrick. And Lloyd was played by Matt Frewer, aka Max Headroom himself. Which is amazing because apparently he was a very big inspiration for Jim Carrey. Even if they're not super accurate to the characters, I at least give them props for doing a good job with the voices.
I've got more complaints today because of you 2 guys than I have in all my time delivering pizzas.
Hey, look on the bright side.
Yeah, look on the bright side.
What bright side?
Yeah,
And secondly, there is one episode I did like, mainly because of its creativity. In the episode, Harry and Lloyd get abducted by space aliens. They plan to do bad things to them, but they soon start messing around with the ship and annoying them. Honestly, I wish there were more episodes of this show that were as out there as this one, because it would have been more memorable. The show wasn't that successful, as it only lasted 1 season and 13 episodes total, so that makes it the shortest running out of all 3 of these shows. Not the worst show I've ever talked about, but compared to the movie, it's very underwhelming. Anyway, 2 months after the Dumb and Dumber cartoon, we then got the third and final of these cartoons, the Ace Ventura animated series. The plot of this show is no too dissimilar from the first movie. Ace is an eccentric, animal-loving private eye in Miami. Along with his monkey sidekick Spike, they go out and solve mysteries involving animals, with every episode being a caper that Ace is asked to come in and solve. To give an overall opinion ahead of time, this show isn't as good as The Mask, but it is better than the Dumb and Dumber cartoon. Mainly because the original movie's premise works a lot better for a series, and I also feel that it was more in line with the original films, with a lot of references and callbacks like Ace's obsession with his hair, Ace talking through his butt, and catchphrases like "alrighty then" and "lahoo zaher." A lot of this is helped by the voice actor Michael Dangerfield, who I personally think out of all the Jim Carrey impersonators is the closest to replicating Jim Carrey's voice.
Being the sporting man I am, I'll take you to the Groves, mate. Just to prove how dumb you are.
If I'm dumb, you're dumber.
This show feels more in tune with something from Fox Kids or one of those Canadian shows that would get picked up by Teletoon or Jetix. Actually, wait, this show actually was on Jetix for a while. From the design having a very stylized look to it, similar to shows like Ned's Newt or Nightmare Ned. Like The Mask, the show only lasted 3 seasons, but the release of them was a bit messed up. The first 2 seasons were aired on CBS regularly from 1995 to 1997, but after a year or 2 break, the 3rd and final season was aired on Nickelodeon from 1999 to 2000. The thing that surprises me is that this cartoon was so popular, it apparently spawned some of its own spin-off media. I mean, not a whole lot, but just a few more things I wanted to talk about in this review. There was a CD-ROM game, yes, for real, a CD-ROM game based on a show, based on a movie. I haven't played it, but from what I've read and from what I've seen, it looks like a mediocre point-and-clicker. But the best thing to come out of this show was a crossover with the Mask animated series. The plot involving Stanley calling Ace to help find Milo after he was kidnapped by one of the show's reoccurring villains. From there, there's some brain-swapping, space aliens, romance, mambo, and the 2 characters have absolutely perfect chemistry. Stanley often thinks Ace is way too crazy, but once he becomes the Mask, the 2 are constantly trying to one-up each other. Easily the best episode from both of these shows.
Take care now. Bye-bye then. Somebody stop us!
And so here's my final ranking. The Mask is my personal favorite, Dumb and Dumber I think is the weakest, and sandwiched in between is the Ace Ventura cartoon. I'm the Media Whiz, because one art form wasn't enough.
He reminds me of me.